There's probably no higher honor for a player when his team or school retires their number when they're done playing for that team. And we have some great players that were the first 3 jerseys retired in college football. Timothy P. Brown of FootballArchaeology.com shares the story with us coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to Tuesday. And it's FootballArchaeology.com day with Timothy P. Brown of that website, the founder and host. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren. Good to see you. I was trying to adjust my little white light here. I've tried a bunch of things to kind of brighten up this room, but I'm down in I've got a basement office and it's always looks kind of yellow. But
yeah,
you're not here to look at. You're not here to look at me. You're here to listen to.
That's right. Nobody wants to look at me either. And I have too much light and it washes me out, and I look like I'm a marshmallow man or something. So but, hey, that's the way it goes. But we're not technology people. We're football people, and we're here to talk a little bit about football and some football of ancient times here, for at least a while back. And you have a really interesting tidbit that I'd love to talk about today. You talk about the first 3 retired jersey numbers in a recent tidbit. And gosh, that really piques the interest just hearing that. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that story and who these 3 jerseys were and who wore them.
Yeah. So, so first of all, before numbers could get retired, people had to wear numbers, right? and when numbers were first being used to identify players, they were like on the scorecards. The players didn't actually wear them, but they wouldn't wear a number necessarily, but the school would publish a scorecard and if somebody did a certain thing, they made a tackle, they scored a touchdown, or they came into the game as a substitute, they would post that player's number on the scoreboard in a particular spot. And then that is what, you'd have to, number 5. And then that was, you'd find the corresponding number on the scorecard. So then you'd know who the player was. But so that was kind of a, thing people don't realize is kind of a goofy little thing that occurred. But one of the other things when that process was going on is that, the numbers could change from week to week. I mean, normally they came up with one order at the beginning of the year, and then they just numbered the guys 1 through 25, right? And then whoever the visiting team was, they'd number them too, and assign them a number. So that, the numbers didn't really mean anything to the players. But then so starting 1905 is the first time, numbers are worn in a football game. But it didn't really begin until the mid-teens when a lot more teams started wearing them. And so then it wasn't until 1925 there's this fellow named Red Grange who turned out to be a pretty good running back at Illinois, and he happened to wear number 77. Not a number we associate with running backs nowadays, but that's what he wore, and he had such a fabulous career that Illinois decided, once he, played his last game, that they would never allow anyone else to wear number 77 for Illinois' football team. So he became the first player to have number retired, and as far as I know, that's across all sports. And so range number 77, boom. So he's the first guy. Then the next guy was a similarly talented running back out at Stanford, Ernie Nevers. And so the kind of funny thing about his story is that he wore number 1, and when they retired, at the time on the Pacific Coast, a lot of the student organizations kind of ran sports much more than they that, I mean, eventually that got professionalized, but so the student organization voted and said, we're not going to allow anybody else to wear number one at Stanford. And so, but then somehow they slipped up, and the next year, a running back got issued the number one for one of the games. And what's just kind of cool about it is just that, it was kind of a big thing. It got caught, and, it was in the newspapers and everything. But then there's a picture in Stanford yearbook for that year that shows this guy wearing number one in a game, and it's just, at that time they didn't have a lot of pictures in the yearbook, but anyways, so that's, and then I've got that in the, shown in the tidbit that we're talking about.
Nevers was probably a little bit ticked. I mean, he was playing pro ball that next year for probably Duluth, probably, I'm assuming. Yeah. That point, but he's probably hey, I thought you retired my number. Why is this guy wearing it? What the hell?
Yeah, well, I tell you, he didn't see it on TV, so he wouldn't have seen it at the time. but yeah, it's kind of a story. And then then they put a stop to it after that first time. So then the third guy to have his number retired, that came in 1927, so 2 years later, and it's a guy that kind of everybody, it's like today, there's certain players that everybody knows. And so at the time, he would have been, certainly known by anybody on the West Coast, probably, other parts of the country, because he was an All-American. But so he was the captain of St. Mary's football team in 1927, a guy named Larry Betancourt. And unlike the first two guys who were running backs, Betancourt was a center. So, and apparently he was, talented enough, and just, was an honorable guy, all that kind of stuff. So then they end up retiring his number. And then, but he ended up, instead of signing with the NFL, he signed a major league contract. And then he played like 3 years with the St. Louis Browns, the same organization Ernie Nevers played baseball for. And then he played like in parts of 3 seasons in the majors, and then retired in like 32. And then he played for the Packers in 1933. So like 6 years after, 6 years after getting out of college, he then goes and, picks up a 1 season anyways with the Packers. So anyways, Larry Betancourt.
Interesting.
Answer to a trivia question for you.
Yeah, it definitely is. Now, Tim, maybe you can answer this question. Now, we know today when players' numbers get retired, definitely in a professional sport, even college football too, there's usually like at their final home game. I've seen it happen a lot of times, or they'll say, "Hey, this is the last time this number is going to be worn on the field," so people appreciate that player a little bit more. Now, in the 1920s, when Grange and Betancourt and Ernie Nevers, was it the same kind of thing at their last game, or did they have like a separate photo shoot or ceremony or something?
Yeah, I don't think it was all that formalized. So to my knowledge, certainly nothing occurred at a game. So like Illinois, there's a picture that was taken at the time with Grange holding his jersey, his hands, after a game. So I mean, it was a staged photo. So they knew they were doing this, but to my knowledge, I don't think they did any kind of ceremony, as part of his last game. And then the others, Nevers and Betancourt, I think with Nevers, they kind of heard of, hey, this is what happened with Grange, we should do the same thing with Nevers. So I think that came a little bit after the fact. And then Betancourt too. I mean, as far as I could tell, looking at their yearbooks and things like that, I didn't see anything about this happening to him during the time he was, still playing for them. And then, he played baseball for them the following spring too.
No, I'm trying to think. Was Nevers like a year ahead of Grange? Because I know Nevers played and Stanford played Notre Dame in that 1925 Rose Bowl. And Grange, I think, was a junior in 1925 or 1924 season. So
Yeah.
1925 would have been his final season where
Yeah, I
Thanksgiving.
think they were both seniors in 25.
Oh, were they?
If
Okay.
I'm not mistaken.
So Nevers was a junior when he played in that Rose Bowl. Okay. That's why I was a little bit confused. I was thinking the Rose Bowl was his last game. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
So,
for
so
Grange,
anyway, I mean, it's just one of those things that we kind of take for granted now, but it's like everything else. Somebody had to think this up, right? So somebody thought up, hey, we're gonna not let anybody else wear Red Grange's number. I think it's lost to time, who that was. But it's just one of those things. Somebody made it up, and and now it's a tradition and a tremendous honor, regardless of sport, and whether it's your high school or anything. If they retire your number, then you must have done some pretty good things there.
right. It's also caused some interesting situations. I sit there and I think about a couple of years ago when JJ Watt went to the Cardinals. He wanted to wear 99 like he wore at Houston, but that was Marshall Goldberg's number for the Chicago Cardinals, and he had
Yeah,
to ask the Marshall Goldberg family for permission. They of course allowed it. I think about Joe Montana, when he wore 16 with the 49ers. When he went to the Chiefs, of course 16 was retired from Len Dawson, so he had ended up wearing I think 15 when he was with the Chiefs. But just kind of some interesting things with these legends going to another team. And hey, you can't have your number you wore at your old team because we have our own legend here by that number. So kind of a
yeah,
neat thing
yeah.
there too.
Well, and it's just like at the professional level, you get into merchandising and all that kind of stuff. But it's just kind of funny how attached people become to a number. That oftentimes is kind of just randomly assigned somewhere along the line. They got that number, and then it becomes part of their identity. And so anyway, I just the whole thing is kind of amusing in some respects.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's amazing how we do become attached to the numbers. I know as being a Steelers fan, even to this day, when I think of number 10, I think of Roy Jarella, the kicker from the 70s, because that's who I grew up was number 10. And, you have Santonio Holmes catching, Super Bowl winning catches wearing that number. And you've had a multitude of other players wearing that number 10. And definitely not Roy Jarella, the kicker. They're much more athletic and doing some better things than kicking field goals and things like that too. So it's just amazing how we associate that. So good chat there. A great discussion. And you have some really cool things and aspects of football that you point out that are sometimes so obvious and staring us right in the face. But you bring up some history to it and some stories to it in your daily tidbits. And maybe you could share with the listeners how they can partake in reading your tidbits.
Yeah, so the best way is to just go to footballarchaeology.com and subscribe. It's free. Then you'll get an email in your inbox, and you can let them pile them up or read them as soon as you get them, whatever you want to do. Just don't delete them, that's for sure. And otherwise, if you don't want to do that, then you can follow me on Twitter, on Threads, or subscribe to just get the Substack app, and you can follow me there and not necessarily get an email.
All right. Well,
kind of whatever works for you.
Yeah, most definitely. And Tim, we really appreciate you coming on here, folks. The link to the tidbit that Tim just spoke about today is in the show notes of this podcast. It'll also take you into footballarchaeology.com. You go into, once you're into there, and you can check out some of these great tidbits he has there. And, hit him up on Twitter and some of these other social medias he's on, and, message him on Threads. Or on Substack, I'm sorry. As I quite often do reading these and put my 2 cents worth, and we have a little banter a couple times a week on this, along with some others, and it's good fun reading a tidbit, and it's good fun with the comments section too. So Tim, we appreciate you, and we would love to talk to you again next week about some more great football.
Very good. I'm sure we'll find something to chat about.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. we invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.